Welcome to the We Hack Purple podcast, where each episode we meet a new person from the information security industry. I am Tanya Janca, I am your host, and our sponsor for this episode is the Diana Initiative. They have a call for papers opening up March 1st, which is probably just after this episode is going to be released. And you could submit at the Diana Initiative website.com. So it's dianainitiative.org. They're also looking for sponsors like We Hack Purple, and you can sponsor them too. And they just announced today that I am the keynote. I'm very excited. I have lots of good news, and I'm very proud to be a part of this awesome, wonderful event that supports many of We Hack Purple's values. But you're like, I didn't come to hear that, Tanya. I came here to see your guest. And my guest today is Scott Helme. Welcome, Scott.
Hello, thank you.
Could you tell, so for people that live under a rock, could you please tell them a little bit about yourself?
Sure, yeah. So my name is Scott Helme. I'm based in the UK, and my background is in security. So I currently run my own couple of companies, actually, but primarily run my own SaaS product. We are like an information security product. I might also be known for things like securityheaders.com, which is like a free security kind of assessment / education tool. I blog things as well. I do conference speaking, kind of show my face every now and again in the media. So yeah, just like kind of a rounded, exposure across different areas of cybersecurity.
Awesome. So people that have been reading things that I write and listening to me speak, I'm very excited about security headers. And I discovered Scott from securityheaders.com, and I follow Troy Hunt, and he talks about Scott, and I was like, this person kind of seems awesome. I wonder if I ask really nicely if he will agree to be on my podcast. And as you can see, it worked.
I am. And I was happy to.
Yes. So we are going to talk today about the new security headers. And for those of you that are just listening, I have my two fingers up on each hand, and I'm doing the double quotes for new. So why do I think they're new? And Scott, what are we talking about actually?
I think they're new because they're kind of like new to you, right? And if something is new to you, then it is new by kind of like definition. And we have lots of different security headers out there that are available to help people improve the security on their websites. But we seem to have this gap, and it's a gap that I've been trying to bridge with tools like securityheaders.com, where we create these standards and these technologies, like these security headers, these features that people can enable to make their websites more secure. And I'm like using my hands now for people not looking. So they're like over on the left side of the screen. And then over here on the right-hand side of the screen, we have like the people that actually build and operate websites. And we're missing like the bridge in the middle. So a lot of these things come into existence and exist for a long time. And then it's like months or even years until people find out about them via accident somewhere because somebody sent a tweet and they're like, hey, what's this thing? So yeah, like we have them and they exist and they're awesome. But because the knowledge isn't kind of being transferred over to the people that actually need to use them, when people do actually eventually find out about them, and I do this all the time in both of my training courses, I'm like, hey, did you know this thing exists? And people are like, no, oh my gosh, that sounds really cool. And I'm like, oh, great, it's been around for like 6 years. And it's not their fault, right? It's just like that's the first time they've heard about it. So of course it's air quote new because it is new. So I like the fact that we're so many years into some of these things, but we still have like this new excitement all the time because people are only just finding out about them.
I have to say, Scott, I had a surprise a little while ago. I was teaching secure coding, and someone informed me that the security header expect-CT was no more. I was like, what? Scott didn't even tell me? Just to be clear, listeners, I didn't know him then. But I still felt I somehow been informed.
Yeah, it's kind of on the way out now. It's I think I play around with Chrome Canary and other like dev versions of browsers. I think that might actually even be kind of like stable and gone now if I'm kind of remembering the timelines correctly. Yeah,
it's out now. And
so
but why? Because expect CT, I thought the goal was sort of there's some rogue certificate authorities, or CAs as they're called, and that, or maybe not rogue, they're very permissive and maybe giving certificates to questionable people and groups. And then it's like, well, this really crappy phishing site has a certificate. Who gave it to them? Oh, that CA again. Those guys. I remember
Yep.
them. And so did we decide we're fine with CAs that are too
Well,
generous?
yeah, it's kind of a I in a lot of these scenarios, like I see both sides, right? And I'm kind of the opinion like I would have liked it to have stayed. And it's like, okay, if it stays and like hardly anyone uses it, at least the people that want to use it can use it. And it was already there. So it's not like we're saying, please go build this thing that hardly anybody will use. It's like, please can we just keep the thing that a few of us think is good? So I kind of think like, well, they could have just left it. But it's still like code to maintain and functionality to test and to not break in the future. And there's an overhead there. And maybe you could make the argument the return on investment was really small. But yeah, like I would have liked to have kept it. I use it on my sites and Report URI supports it. So I would have liked to have seen it stay, but it did not, unfortunately.
It may sound odd, but I find some satisfaction in that idea of like adding it to a site and then contributing to us trying to stop CAs that are not fighting the good fight, right? I'm helping in this minuscule way, but I'm helping.
Yeah. And this is kind of part of the reason why I guess they're also trying to justify having gone now is that the browsers are checking that your certificate has been or the certificate that they come across has been submitted to those certificate transparency logs, but it's taken away the ability for me as the site owner to get that feedback back from the browser, so I guess like the underlying security mechanism is still happening, but it's the feedback mechanism to the site operator that we're losing. And I'm like, right, but I'd still like to know. Like I still want to know.
Yeah. Um, Actually, I just realized that so a lot of people that listen to the We Hack Purple podcast have a lot of technical experience, but I just realized that maybe we should explain what security headers are just
Mm.
so that the audience knows, like, do you want to do it or do you want me to do it?
So yeah, I'd be happy to take a brief explanation of security headers there. So we use it as a general term to refer to any HTTP response header that we use to configure some kind of security mechanism on the client. So there are many security headers. They, all have their own purpose and they all control or configure their own security functionality on the client.
And it's just so most of them are one or two lines of code. It's not like we're expecting you to write
Absolutely, yeah.
pages.
Yeah, no, they are literally like in most circumstances, just like you say, like one line of code or config, however you choose to implement a HTTP response header. And this is the thing that I love about them. It's like, oh, what's the overhead? Oh, well, it's like this one line of config. There you go. So you can either do it in the server, in the application. Like a lot of people now do it in their CDM provider because you can just go tick a box somewhere and enable the header and off you go. So yeah, super easy wins, and I like those.
Yes, and I think so. I personally equate security headers to sort of like seat belts, and cars didn't used to have seat belts, right? But there also used to be very few cars, and so the likelihood of your car hitting another car at first was quite low, and it increased over time. And then, if you're my age, at some point, someone hit your car with their car, um, hopefully gently. But the thing about seatbelts is that it protects you only when something bad happens. The rest of the time, it does
Yep.
nothing. It's not fashionable, but it's also like not a ton of work to use one. And so security headers, most of the time, they do not very much, right? But then if something bad happens, they're like, oh no, I don't think so, actually.
And this
Like,
is the kind of the problem we have it, I guess, in terms of like convincing people that they're a good idea, because until people, it's like, if you, to use your analogy, because it was a great one, if you imagine somebody who doesn't wear their seatbelt and nothing's ever gone wrong, it's hard to convince them that they should start using one. But if you find somebody that doesn't wear their seatbelt that's been involved in an accident, you could probably convince them really, really easily that seatbelts are a good idea. And we're really good as humans at responding to that negative stimulus to change a habit.
yeah.
But like I'm kind of stuck in the position where I'm trying to convince people to change the habit and use these security mechanisms, but they've not had that negative stimulus of why do we need one, and that's really, really hard.
Yeah. So I find a lot of cybersecurity people, when they talk about stuff, they always talk about, like, well, if you don't do this, the war on cyber. I'm like, it's a war on cyber? I thought we were trying to use cyber to defend it. Never mind grammar. But like they want to like fear, uncertainty, and doubt. They
Yeah.
use those things a lot to market. And I try not to just scare the pants off of everyone all the time. I don't enjoy receiving that like doom and gloom and like it's the end of the world all the time. But
Yep.
also please use security headers. Like, is there a middle ground here of like maybe to, yeah, I don't know.
I'm trying to find it, and because I completely agree with you there. Like, I hate the idea of selling this on fear. It's like, buy our product or you're going to be hacked and lose millions. I'm like, there's got to be a better way to phrase that. Like there's got to be a better process there. So I don't know what it is. We're working on it. That's why a lot of my tools are kind of, my blog and security headers are free and they're great education resources if people find out about them and they're like, hey, what is the value of this thing? But sometimes you also do have to explain the pain points. Like somebody will be like, well, what does this do? What will this protect me against, so that they can understand, is it worth it to buy it or to spend the money to implement it? Because even though security headers are all free, you still have some effort to go and configure them. So there is still a cost. And you have to justify, like the cost of implementing it versus the potential reward. So yeah, like I think you can convey the danger. Like people talk about seatbelts and no one really wants to talk about getting seriously injured in a car crash. But you also have to understand that they stop you getting seriously injured in a car crash. So yeah, like I think there's a way to have the conversation without being scary or trying to scare people.
Yeah. So a silly story back to when I was a musician, I would play music in bars all over Ottawa and around Canada. And I remember one night, the opening musician for me came with like this great big black eye. And it turned out he'd been driving, or he had been in the passenger seat, and him and his friend were driving, and he was not wearing a seatbelt. And they passed by. So there's this restaurant in North America called Hooters, where the women wear not very much clothes. And the ladies that work there were out on the front wearing little tiny bikinis, playing volleyball on the front lawn of the restaurant to try to get business, which I have so many thoughts on that I don't need to share. But so his friend hit the car ahead of him because they were both staring at the Hooter
Oh
ladies.
no.
And I was like, this is why you need to wear a seatbelt, because otherwise the Hooter ladies will give you a black eye. And then I played my first song. And he was just like, I'm going to die now. I'm so embarrassed. And so maybe we could use silly stories that illustrate, like, maybe you think your site doesn't have cross-site scripting, but if it does, the first thing that they usually do is they're like, can I get at that cookie? Because they want your session ID.
Yep.
And then if they don't get the cookie, it's like, okay, well, I'm going to call out to my other site where I have this huge, giant, long script where I can do tons of attacking versus like your username field that only accepts 50 characters. They want way more than 50 characters of JavaScript to mess you over, right? And so when I explain that to them, I'm like, the first thing they do is call out. And if that script is not listed in your list of resources for your content security policy header, you just ruined that bad person's day. Yep. Don't you want to ruin their day? I do.
Yeah, don't you want to kind of stick it to the evil people that are doing these things, right? And
I do.
in any scenario when having one of these headers configured and deployed would have saved you, it's always going to save you from something really, really bad, because nobody hacks into your website and they're like, you know what, I'm going to take it easy on this person. it's like, yeah, it's like, yes, there's a very, very low chance of them helping you, because there's a quite low chance of you being the victim of an attack. But if you are, you really, really, really want to stop it.
Yes. So okay, so back. Sorry, I'm off topic with musicians and black eyes and seatbelts.
It's good.
But what about these new new security headers, like the new ones? Do you want to talk about some of them?
Yeah, for sure. So the most kind of recent ones, I actually did a kind of a half serious jokey blog post title about some of these recently, because there's quite a few of them and they're all like 4-letter acronyms, and when you see them all written down, it's just like, what on earth are all of these crazy things that are written here? So yeah, the most kind of recent ones for things like cross-origin embedded policy, cross-origin opener policy, they're really kind of targeting some quite advanced issues to fix. So for anybody who's kind of followed along, in the tech space and been reading the tech news, we've had some pretty advanced attacks like Spectre and Meltdown made particularly large headlines, right? And they're all of these headers are kind of combined together to provide protection against those kinds of attacks. And the most basic way I can think of to kind of explain this is, if you have a browser tab open and you're kind of on your bank or doing some medical website or something like that, there's sensitive data in the page, in the client, in the browser. And if that person, let's say they have like another tab open and they're on some completely unrelated website. And as I look around my screen, I have like 57 tabs. So, like this is, I'm like, yeah, this is me. I'm the target for the things like this. So it's like, if you have all the tabs open and one of those tabs has some bad JavaScript doing some bad stuff, there's a, yes, agreed, like a very small chance, but there is a very small chance that it could kind of somehow reach across into another tab and access data that it just should not be able to access. And, at a very high level, those are the kinds of things that, especially these newer of the new security headers are trying to stop, is to allow that complete isolation between those different origins, those different sites.
So for people who are listening, when we say new, and the reason why we're making fun of the word new is because, so when I noticed this, I think it was September 2022, they came out in 2021. And I was like, how did I not know? It's been like, yes, it was a busy year for me in 2022, but I was just like, what, this changed? And like, I didn't get a memo or anything.
Yeah. And they were being designed kind of, 2019 through into 2020 as well. So that's when the initial idea starts circulating and it starts to get a little bit of coverage, and the standards bodies seek feedback from people in the industry. So yeah, like when we get to the point where it's standardized, it's probably already been around for a couple of years as well. So yeah, we're looking at, right now, since standardization, 2 years solid, and probably 3 to 4 if you include the processes.
It feels like a lot of work. It feels like, so I'm really glad that you are I don't know if this is the right word, but like you're an advocate for this. You're an advocate for using security headers to protect your site, an advocate for these are new ones, we should adopt them. Would it be like ridiculous if we kind of talked about the 4 new ones, or just like maybe what is content security policy header, just high level, and like just talk about them just a little bit so that people that are listening are like, oh gosh, I gotta use those 4 new security headers. This is gonna make my day, or at least consider them.
Yeah, for sure. And I think there's probably kind of, even if you were to look at like the release of security headers chronologically, I think your deployment and use of them should probably follow that, right? Because we deploy one or we do this thing and we're like, oh, that worked really well. Oh, now we should also do like this next step. So I think whilst they're all completely, unrelated in most of what they do, I think if you look at the chronology of the headers, you can see us realizing and getting better at fixing stuff with them, right? So I think people should kind of start at the beginning and follow through with the process. So I think it makes sense to, A, talk about them chronologically, but B, look at, you should probably deploy them in the order they were released, because the ones that we released like 8 years ago were fixing problems from 8 years ago, and if you've not fixed those, you should fix those first. So yeah, there's loads of great ones. Like HSTS is so simple. It's like an on-off setting, and there's no negative. So HTTP, strict transport security, is the full name of that header. And it basically says to the browser, if you've deployed HTTPS on your website, which everybody should have done, then you say to the browser, hey, I've deployed HTTPS, and you know what? From now on, me and you, we should only ever speak secure. And the browser will then say, okay, I've got you. I know from now on, you always expect a secure connection, and I'm going to make sure that happens so that this person's bank details or medical data or emails or whatever it is are always encrypted. And it's like, is there anyone out there that doesn't want that assurance? Like, do you want to make sure your stuff is always encrypted?
I've literally had this fight many times, Scott. I kid you not. And you know what so the idea is if someone tries to connect in an unencrypted manner, it redirects it to HTTPS, and it's like secure, like TLS or nothing, or bust.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, yeah, literally.
But I was like trying to explain, like, this could happen, that could happen. They're like, oh, I don't do those things. I'm like, but do your customers or citizens or employees do those things? Oh, they would never do. Trust me, they do those things. And so the example that I found worked the most, as dumb as this sounds, is if you go to a hotel, like a major hotel, and you are using unencrypted, like you're visiting an unencrypted site, it will swap the ads with their own ads.
Yeah, this is a really big thing. Yeah,
I know. And that was the thing that offended people. Not malicious actors could deliver malvertising, not like they could get your sensitive they're just like, I'm not watching any stupid ads. It's over between us. HSTS for life. Yeah. I'm like, okay, I'll take it.
And do you know what? Like sometimes I find this like so many times with these kind of security mechanisms, it's not like the altruistic or we're doing the right thing and protecting our customers that convinces people to do it. We have like these weird little things like you just explained where it's like, that's the thing that's going to motivate you. And then I'm like, you know what? Never mind. Let's do it. Like, shut up, Scott. Like just they're doing the thing. Just let them do the thing. And I'll take whatever wins that we can get.
That's awesome. And so then content security policy header, it does
Mm,
so many things because we used to
yeah.
have a policy, like a security header that was going to block cross-site scripting, so XSS protection.
Action. Yeah.
But we don't really use that one anymore because it only works on really old sites and ridiculously obvious attacks that are just so
Yes.
silly.
Yeah.
Like, come on, people.
Yeah. It
But
was
then,
like, yeah.
but
Sorry.
then content security policy header came. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so CSP is like you say, it does so many things, and I commonly, yeah, I commonly refer to it as like the Swiss Army knife of security headers because it's the one with the most functionality, and you can just like whip out one of the little utility things to do the thing that you need to do. So, content security policy or CSP is primarily viewed as a way to control the things that your site loads. So, you know, a typical site, mine, yours, probably most other people's, we load JavaScript from all over the place and style sheets and images and fonts and you name it, and we load it. And one day, like a bad JavaScript tag gets into your site somehow, cross-site scripting attack, like you said. And it might load from evil.com/keylogger.js. And the browser's going to be like, yeah, man, I'm going to load that. And you and I would look at that and be like, what are you doing? You know, this is a crazy, terrible idea. But the browser doesn't have that context. So the point of the CSP is to give it the knowledge of what should be there. So, hey, here is a list of the places I load JavaScript. And then when the browser sees JavaScript loading from somewhere that's not on the list, the browser goes, well, hang on a minute. That's not supposed to happen. So goodbye, script. And then the browser can call back and tell you and say, hey, do you know that you're loading this script and you said it shouldn't happen? And then you can be like, oh my gosh, you know, like, so already the attack is neutralized because the browser blocked the script, and it then sent the report because ideally you're going to go and investigate how did it get there and then remove it. So that's like the full circle of resolution. So it's a massively powerful thing. It's, you know, the ability to give the browser that knowledge of like, hey, welcome to my site. Here's what's supposed to happen. If something else happens, please block it and tell me.
Yes.
And off you go. Like you've got a mega level of protection there.
Yes. It's it is not as widely used as I would enjoy seeing. I did a tweet this week about, so in Canada, we have this governmental department called the Canada Revenue Agency, and they do our taxes. And Scott, I logged in this weekend and it said, you have to accept our terms of service. And it said, we don't accept any responsibility for the security of your data because we did all reasonable steps to protect this website. And so guess what I did? I went to harddenies.com and all the other places. And I was like, here's your report about how you have not done even the most basic. They don't even have HSTS. I'm like, are you guys asleep over there? What's going on? So if you're from Canada Revenue Agency, you know, call me and I'll help. Because call me maybe. Yeah. But like, they have my money, Scott. They have all of Canada's money and they don't have CSP. And that's not okay.
And it's wild, isn't it? Because there's certain sectors that seem to do really well at adopting it. And then there's other sectors, and the government sector here in the UK is also one of them, where you're just like, hello, is there anybody there? Like, please, can I help you do this? Like, I'm willing to help you because this is really powerful and really important.
They didn't have any secure cookie stuff either. And I tweeted at their minister, I'm obnoxious. I'm going to write a blog post because that's how I roll. I harassed my banks so Canada only has, we really have 4 or 5 banks, and all the rest of them are just owned by those 4 or 5 banks. Yeah. They're just like pretend. And so I just kept tweeting at them over and over again. I'm like, why no MFA? Why 2FA, please? And they're like, we have security questions. I'm like, you have insecurity questions. Those are not an advantage. No. And so I just kept hassling them, and now they all have MFA. And nice. I know it's not me that did all of that, but I hope that in some small way I annoyed them into doing the right thing. Just like 0.01% of the push.
Yep. And it's, it's effective. Like sometimes it just works. And it's like, well, if that's the only option that's available for me to help move things forwards, then I'm going to leverage that option, right? Like, it's, sometimes I'll tweet at an organization and be like, hey, this is terrible. Why can I only have an 11-character password? Like, why is 12 too long? And it's like, the kind of, I guess, you could probably call it like kind of public shaming almost. Done in like a respectful way, in a nice way with a nice objective, like I think, yeah, like applying pressure in that regard, whilst unfortunate that it is necessary, is sometimes necessary.
Didn't you and Troy Hunt make a site called Why No HTTPS?
Yep. This is and there's still a surprisingly large number of sites on there in the year 2023 that don't, just automatic. If you go to them on HTTP nowadays, I would expect every site to just immediately redirect you and be like, nope, this should be secure. And there's still quite a surprisingly large number of big sites as well that don't do that, and they'll happily let you browse around on HTTP. And I'm like, yeah, this is not a good idea. This is not a good
No.
idea.
I actually often will call small businesses. Like I remember like I had to see a travel doctor and I was like, hey, your site's allowing HTTP and doesn't have HTTPS. And so Chrome's blocking access to your site and they're just like, what do we do? And I'm like, I'm going to write instructions for you. And you're going to call your web developer and you're going to give me their phone number because you have my medical information now. And even if it's just that I want like the hepatitis A and B shot because I'm going to a place where that's a popular thing and I don't want to be a part of that popular thing, I still want my stuff to be private. And they're just like, oh, thanks. And I'm like, and then they gave me my vaccine for free, which was pretty cool because I helped fix
Oh,
their
that's
website.
nice.
Yeah,
I like
that
it
was
when you
pretty
get a
cool.
little reward for, kind of prodding people along in the right direction.
Yeah,
But
usually they're just like, why are you being mean to me? I'm like, I'm trying to help.
I guess we need like the same, because we're talking about HTTPS now, like it's some kind of, and it pretty much is like ubiquitous thing, right? Like I've got a gazillion browser tabs, and I don't think any of them will be HTTP if I was to click through all of them, because we got there, right? We did it. But if you scroll back maybe 6 years, 7 years, it really wasn't popular. It was super, super rare, and it was very selective. But we had, the thing that sparked that kind of fire in HTTPS deployment was Snowden in 2013-14. And it just goes to show, like the industry did it. We went from hardly any HTTPS to almost all HTTPS, probably between 2014 and maybe 2020, because we had that huge negative stimulus. We had that concerted effort across the industry. And now I'm kind of like, hey, like, how do we light that fire for more security mechanisms, right? Like HTTPS is the start of the process. And I think a lot of people looked at it and they're like, oh, now we're done. And I'm like, no, 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 no. Like we got to keep
There's
the
more.
momentum, keep going. Yeah, exactly. Right. It's like, we have like amazing, like if you've got HTTPS and you're not using HSTS as a security header, I'm like, you're missing out, right? Like you're not, air quote, finished. You're not done. You don't have a fully secure site in terms of encryption. And it's the same with the rest of the headers. Like you have to, like deploy them progressively. Like I said earlier, look at the chronology of their release and then, follow along that path, right? Okay, yeah, HSTS, got that deployed, done. Okay, a content security policy, next thing, and keep moving through them and look at the individual things that they provide, right? And if you're a very basic site like my blog, it's just some dude rambling about security stuff on the interwebs, right? Like they're not hard to deploy because the site is simple. I load my content from a few static places and there's not much going on. So it's very minimal effort. If you're like an e-com site or some high traffic site, like, yeah, there's going to be more effort involved in configuring and deploying these things. But at the same time, you get more value back out of them because the risk that they protect against are far more relevant to you. So there's always a risk reward case to be made. But even though the risk of it happening is quite low, it's like if it does happen, it's a catastrophe. So I think that we should still be pushing the adoption of these things.
I could not agree more. And man, I have to wrap up, and this is impossible. I want to talk to you for like 5 more hours at least. Scott, will you tell our listeners and our viewers where they can get more Scott? So I believe you might have a company or a blog. There might be lots of cool things you do. You should tell them about.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks. So I'm on scotthelme.co.uk, which is my personal blog. My companies that are both focused like really heavily around security headers. We have reporturi.com and securityheaders.com. So those are the three kind of like primary resources where if you want to learn more about headers, all three of those sites will help you out on your journey.
So, sorry, what does Report URI do? Like that's a company, right? Aren't you wearing
Yeah.
their shirt? What do they do?
Yeah. I've got my little, so I'm trying to do the whole marketing thing. So I have a t-shirt with the brand on and everything. I'm trying to be the marketing person as well. But yeah, so a lot of these security headers that we've been talking about, they have the ability, if something goes wrong, to call back to you and tell you. And we are a service that will ingest that telemetry and monitor for, hey, we got a new piece of JavaScript on our site. So if it sends us that telemetry, we take a look at it, do some analysis, and if necessary, send you an alert and be like, hey, you got some new JavaScript and this doesn't look good. So we hook into a lot of these features in the browser to basically see what's going on and monitor for bad things happening, and then tell you if the bad things happen.
Oh, I like the last part there, telling them that the bad things, because
Yeah.
I remember explaining to someone, they were like, oh, it's too much risk if you pen test our site. And I'm like, oh, sweetie, you're getting pen tested all the time.
Yeah.
You just don't get the
Like,
report.
go take a look at your logs. Like it's
They didn't have logs, Scott. Don't be ridiculous.
Oh well, yeah. Well, I mean, but then you have no problems, right? Like if
Everything's fine.
yeah, like I'm gonna snapshot that and then turn that into a meme later of like Tanya, like everything is
Everything's
okay.
fine.
But for those people listening and not watching, you'll have to go and take a look at our socials to see that. I'm gonna snap that and meme it.
Oh my gosh, Scott Helme, this has been absolutely amazing. And the Diana Initiative, thank you so much for sponsoring this episode, Scott. Obviously I'm going to ask you to come back on. We just have to keep
Awesome,
talking.
thank you.
Thank you.